Chapter 23. The Duke of Perth's steel pistol proved a persuasive negotiating tool. As James Drummond cocked the gun's hammer and pointed the barrel at the head of Carlisle town clerk, it became even more convincing. "Tell me again why ye cannot proclaim the new King of England," James demanded, shoving his polished Doune revolver against the trembling clerk's forehead. I never proclaimed a king before, and no fun for it," John Pearson stammered. He looked uneasily at the three other men in the room who stood behind James like a murder of crows. "No form for it," James laughed. "What shall we do? Maybe this'll help," one of the soldiers snorted, unsheathing his dirk and pressing the steel blade into the man's quavering neck. With the gun at his head and a knife to his throat, Clerk Pearson acquiesced. "I think maybe I'll be able to come up with a form." "I thought ye might," James smiled. "You will proclaim as of 17 November, 1745, the return of the Stuart monarchy to England. King James III, already proclaimed James VIII of Scotland." "Yes, sir," the clerk responded. His eyes darted between James and the soldier holding the knife to his throat. "Shall I start now, sir?" "Indeed you shall," James exclaimed, backing away. "Leave him to his work," he told the man holding the knife. The soldier backed away reluctantly. "The prince will be here on the morrow. We have much to finish before then." As James left the clerk's chamber, he knew what news he would share in tonight's letter to his mother. She had waited all her life for the return of the Catholic monarch to the English throne, and today her wish came true, if only on paper. Adeena sat curled on the sofa, watching her dad build a fire. Warmth at last seeped into her as she took another sip of hot tea and watched flames engulf the dry logs.
"Tara left in a hurry," her dad said. "Didn't she want to stay, have lunch with us?"
Adeena chuckled. That would have been interesting. After getting a call from work, Tara stormed away yelling over her shoulder, "Hope you got a good lawyer." Now that she was gone, Adeena speculated how the Duncancello got back to the gallery. "Dad, what time did Philip leave?"
"Last night after we went to bed, I guess,"
her dad said, closing up the steel mesh that held the dancing licks of fire at bay.
"He had to work this morning."
"Yeah, he worked all right," Adeena mused. "Worked at saving my butt." She wondered how he got the Duncancello into Tara's office. Her father sat down on the chaise lounge where he liked to read. She noticed the journal sitting on the table beside him. "I'd love to read that," Adeena said, pointing to the leather volume. He sighed.
"I know you would, but don't you think it'll just make things worse?"
"Dad, please, didn't Grandma Stewart send it to us?"
"Pumpkin,"
he started, but then fell silent. Adeena recalled her feelings for the captain she had sparred with a few times. "The prick that wrote that journal is Catherine's brother. He's a real asshole." Her father studied her for a moment. He nodded slowly before responding.
"I did some research before I left Scotland. Couldn't find much on Catherine Carnegie, but I did determine she was a musician."
Adeena lit up. "You found something? Tell me."
"I went to Drummond Castle and met the guide there, a history teacher. He took me to a private archive in Crieff, and I found correspondence that's never been published. Letters from James Drummond."
"Really? How many?" Adeena asked, wide-eyed. Her mother watched from the kitchen, frowning.
"A dozen or more to his mother. I forget her name. I think it's—"
"Lady Jeanne," Adeena interjected.
"Yes, that's it."
"She's amazing," Adeena said, recalling the iron-willed woman. "James is afraid of letting her down. I think that's what drives him."
"How do you know all this?"
Her dad looked at her strangely. "Because I spent time with James and his mother. And of course the asshole captain."
"Sir James Carnegie, the one who wrote this journal?"
"Yeah. And there's something even stranger."
"Stranger? Stranger than you going back in time and becoming another woman?"
Her father had spoken the words, and now her mother stepped forward from the kitchen. She seemed ready to interrupt, but didn't. "The score, the one you sent me that Grandma took from Kinnaird," Adeena explained. "I wrote the first bars myself when I was a teenager, but I could never finish, hard as I tried. And I had lyrics in my head that didn't make sense until you sent me that music."
"Are you sure it was the same?"
Her mother jumped in. Yes, I am. When I got the score, I couldn't believe that the first 8 bars were note for note the ones I had written. A song I couldn't finish. And my lyrics, words that just poured from me one day a long time ago, were still stuck in my head. They fit the music perfectly. Adeena studied the effect of her words on her parents. They looked worried. Her dad spoke first.
"There is no record of Catherine Carnegie ever publishing music,"
He said, more to himself than to his wife and his daughter.
"In one letter, though, James Drummond talks about the music she performed and the effect on him and the men in his regiment."
"What'd he say?" Adeena and her mother both exclaimed almost simultaneously.
"Trying to remember,"
he said, reaching for his iPad. He searched a second.
"I took some pictures of the letters."
He tapped the screen and scrolled up until he found it. He read the words aloud.
"Lady Catherine's song pierced not only my heart, but all my men who heard it that evening. Even the prince is humbled against the power of her instrument, of her words and of her voice. She woke the passion to fight in every last man gathered at Drummond, and I am glad you asked me to thank her afterwards. Even now, as our situation becomes precarious, I hold her words close."
Adeena closed her eyes. I remember that night. I played at the ball, and afterwards James and I danced. She relived the breathless excitement of dancing for what seemed like hours. He wouldn't let me stop. Her mother shook her head, and Adeena caught her looking at her. What was she thinking? As if to answer, her mother bit her lip tersely and walked back toward the kitchen without a word. "And you expect me to believe that?" Tara barked. The young man standing in her office, Michael from security, smiled nervously. "I work the night shift and go to school during the day. I don't get much sleep." "Oh, perfect. That's your excuse for sending up a fake?" Michael shrugged his shoulders as Pablo tapped on the glass doors of her office holding a cello case. She waved him in. "Good thing the exhibit is closed today." Tara fumed as Pablo came through the doors. "Let me see." Pablo set the case down and opened it up. "This cello we have on display." He turned to Michael, who stood beside another cello case on a stand. "And that, we believe, is the actual Duncan cello. It was in the secure area until Michael realized the mix-up and brought it up this morning. I asked him to put it in your office and called you right away." "Let me see them both," Tara snapped. Pablo set the cases on the floor and carefully opened them. Tara compared the two. She could see no obvious differences. They seemed to be identical twins. But upon closer examination, the cello that Michael had delivered from storage looked older somehow when she compared the two instruments side by side. Tara was only an amateur archivist. Her job was to organize exhibits, select works, and attract paying customers. She wisely let others handle the meticulous work of restoration and preservation. She was certain they would confirm this instrument, supposedly stored in the basement all this time, to be the actual Duncan cello. She would have them tag the fake and increase security on the real one. Her phone rang. It was Andre, her boss. She waved Pablo and Michael out of her office. "Close the door, please," she said, dropping down on the leather chair behind her desk. She hurriedly gathered her thoughts. "Good morning, Andre. How are things in London?" She needed time to think. Good thing he was in England, likely calling for an update and to discuss strategy for the auction he would be attending this evening at Harrods. As they talked, Tara noticed Michael and Pablo outside her office. They seemed to be having a lively exchange, with Pablo doing most of the talking, and Michael shaking his head vigorously. Pablo raised his arms for emphasis and proceeded to use an animated series of arm gestures to reinforce whatever he was saying. Michael grinned, nodding his head, watching Pablo. After a moment, they shook hands and patted each other warmly, leaving Tara wondering what in the world they were talking about. Whatever it was, she didn't like the looks of it. November of 1745 was darker and colder in northern England than usual, even for this forlorn month. The sun had been swallowed up, leaving behind only gray gloom and frigid air for both man and beast alike. Despite their initial success at Carlisle, when the town welcomed the prince's army, the campaign to return the Stuart monarchy to England was hitting a wall of resistance. James Drummond struggled to keep his own spirits high, and his men from fleeing back to the comfort of their homes in the Tay Valley. While he favored inspiration over desperation, and praise over punishment, of late he had found more and more that he needed to dispense military justice. Even for a minor infraction, he had made men suffer the bite of a horsewhip, or the terror of a freezing night in a black cell without rations. His regiment moved heavy guns, artillery, and supplies to support the Highland regiments led by Prince Charles. When they arrived in an English town that had been surrounded by the prince and his army, they would help secure rations, brandy, and lodgings before making their camp. The first night often led to drunken looting and raping, all of which he had tried to curtail as much as possible without much success. Catherine's warning haunted him still. Her words about the prince echoed in his head. "He will fail, and you will not live to see another summer." Her message inside his tunic kissed his bare chest. "I will always wait for you, forever, even when I'm gone." As he opened his tent to greet yet another cold gray morning, her face washed over him. Her eyes, her mouth, her whole countenance were something he conjured readily. He felt his passion rising, recalling the feeling of her in his arms at Drummond Castle. If she were here now, he would take her as a man does with the woman who is truly made for him, and she would give herself to their holy union. He wanted Catherine flowing through him, and he through her, two united as one. The bitter chill yanked him from his reverie. The wind blew fiercely this morning, and a group of ragged soldiers approached him with a look of desperation. "Brandy's about done, sir," one of them quipped. The boy, no more than 10 and 5 years, held a flask in his hand. "Look!" He turned the bottle upside down. James knew that the men could not be expected to start another wretched day without brandy. "I'll get more for all of you, but here, take this now." He pulled a vessel from his vest and offered it to the man, who bowed his head. "Thank you, sir." James watched as the boy offered the brandy to his older companion, who stared with hollow eyes and feeble expression. The old man looked dirty and seemed cold with a chill that must be deep in his bones by now. His hand shook as he raised the vessel to his lips and sucked a heavy dram. The warmth lifted him a little, and he sighed his appreciation. Brandy and oats were all that kept these men from deserting. They were farmers, not soldiers. To raise their spirits, he would search for beef today in the village. A boiled supper tonight, if he could provide it, would give them strength to start the 50-mile trek to Manchester, a prize the prince coveted. James was doubtful. He touched his heart and felt the parchment with Catherine's words upon them press against his breast. He was driven by the prince, by his mother, and the whole of Drummond clan to fight and to face death if necessary. But it was the thought of Catherine that kept him longing for life. Jackie stared at the images on Dr. Lochiel's high-resolution computer monitors. "Give me your theory again, Doctor," she asked, somewhat overwhelmed with his 5-minute explanation about the series of scans he showed her.
"No problem,"
he said as he clicked the mouse on his laptop and the screen refreshed.
"I worked on this with Dr. Chung from the university for quite a while, and even I don't quite get it."
"Well, at least it's not just me," Jackie smiled. Lately everything she thought she knew was being turned upside down, and her daughter was the biggest mystery of all. Adeena's stories were compelling, and William was starting to believe that somehow, impossibly, they were true. He claimed that Adeena was not only connected to a woman from the past, but also that she became her, even though the woman was born almost 300 years earlier. Father and daughter seemed to feed off each other, but Jackie knew that if she got sucked in, there would be no one left to question the impossibility of the story.
"This is the area we focused on,"
Dr. Lochiel said, pointing to a section of a CT scan he had zoomed in on.
"And look at this."
He clicked a menu on the screen, and the screen refreshed again. A three-dimensional image appeared.
You see this area between the lateral and third ventricles?
Jackie put on her glasses and peered at the screen. She squinted, trying to see what Dr. Lochiel was pointing to.
Just a second,
he said as he took the mouse and began to draw a red circle on the screen around a small, dark area.
Right here. This may look like a tumor, but it's not. It's a collection of nerve cells that are regenerating at an astounding rate. Dr. Chung has been looking over the scans and wants to come and talk with the patient. He wants to try a new imaging technique he's developing.
That's my daughter you're talking about, Jackie said curtly. She's not a guinea pig for you to experiment with.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make it sound like that,
Dr. Lochiel replied, turning his chair towards Jackie.
Your daughter has nerve growth that is normally only present in developing fetuses or newborn babies.
Jackie frowned as she listened. Go on.
I know it sounds odd, and that's why this case is,
He paused, looking back at the monitor. Case is what?
Well, I've never seen anything like this. You know I always try to give you a full range of options for your patients.
She's my daughter.
I realize that.
He touched his neck and looked down before continuing.
Look, a growth in the brain of any type is not good. In this case, it seems to be benign neuroregeneration. I don't think it's malignant, although we're not sure yet.
Jackie bit her lip. Okay, so what's the problem? She studied the doctor, who seemed to be hedging. Ron, how long have we worked together?
Oh, I don't know, maybe 10 years.
Yeah, so don't hold back here. Adeena has a benign growth in her brain. Are you worried or not? I don't understand what you're saying.
This growth, whatever it is pushing against other areas. It's expanding and...
And what? Why can't you give it to me straight? Dr. Lochiel looked at Jackie squarely.
Your daughter has new cells growing in her brain. It is like another person is developing inside of her.
With the Duncancello gone, Adeena poured herself into the world of practicing and rehearsals and practicing, 12 hours a day, every day, for almost 3 weeks now. Her days were only about the music. If not for the composition she and Catherine had created, it would have been a very boring ordeal, but it was the opposite. The music provided the motivation for her to wake up early. She wrote down all the lyrics she had been nursing since she was 15, that she sang so powerfully as Catherine. Sometimes when she was alone, she sang them out loud to herself. Her voice didn't have the range it did when she sang as Catherine, but then the circumstances were also much different. She wasn't in a candlelit castle backed by live musicians and urged on by a spirited audience. Adeena closed her eyes, recalling those performances. There was a gestalt created when the music left her lips and vibrated off the strings of her instrument. When it connected with the men and women watching her, it ignited something inside them, an elixir she found nowhere else. She realized performing in the NAC orchestra wasn't likely to provide that experience to her, but she was determined nonetheless to prove she could play with them, particularly when they were playing her music. As she was getting set to leave for the afternoon's rehearsal, her cell phone rang.
Hey, you?
It was Philip. Hi, where are you?
London. Just leaving for Rome with the Prime Minister. I wanted to see how you're doing.
Tough life, huh?
Somebody's got to do it,
he said lightly.
I'd like to be back for your opening this weekend, right?
She looked at her watch. Yep, Saturday night. I reserved some very good seats.
Need a date?
Maybe. Got training as a bodyguard?
Is Lang still bothering you?
Philip asked, his tone growing serious. We don't talk to each other, but seeing him take all the credit and watching his head get bigger by the day makes me want to cut off his baton arm, Adeena said, and anything else he might want to wave around. Philip laughed.
Could you wait till I'm back before you do something stupid? If there's going to be a mutilation, I need the inside scoop.
Don't worry, I'll give you an exclusive.
I'd like an exclusive. With you.
There was a pause in the conversation. Adeena couldn't remember the last time they made love, or even just had a fun moment. She was his dark and stormy night, a cliché he should just close the book on. She wanted to feel passion again and be swept away. I miss you, she heard herself saying.
Adeena, I have so much to say to you. I believe in you. What you're doing, that music's inside of you. You belong on a big stage and—"
He hesitated. "And what?"
"And you belong with me."
The hot blade of a straight razor slowly carved the shaving cream from Friedrich Lang's taut throat. He could feel it pull across him smartly, clearing the path ahead like a snowplow.
"Tomorrow, maestro,"
the old barber asked in a thick Slavic accent,
"you play new symphony?"
"Ja," Lang replied, looking up at the ceiling, face stiff to get a closer shave.
"Will be good, no?"
the barber said, shifting his attention to the back of Lang's neck. He pushed the maestro's head down and gingerly placed a hot towel on his next target.
"Not good, my friend. Magnificent,"
Lang chortled. The barber grunted and without missing a beat began applying shaving cream and prepared his blade for round 2.
"You play your music, no?"
"Ja." This will be my music after tomorrow, Lang thought. For all anyone will ever know, he had created a tribute to the human spirit, to fulfilling one's destiny no matter the obstacles. If the world wanted to think of it as a tribute to Ludwig, so be it.
"My wife, she see you on TV,"
the barber continued, a steady patter that Lang usually found annoying, but today judged it to be of much higher quality. "I did a lot of interviews last week, even the BBC and Radio Deutschland. They wanted to do a segment on me for their Beethoven retrospective."
"Beethoven? Oh yeah, he's good,"
the barber chirped. Lang wondered if the man had ever even heard a Beethoven symphony. Probably he was just very good at engaging his clients. Either way, Friedrich Lang and Ludwig von Beethoven had been used together in the same sentence in most of the stories broadcast or published on the new work. At last, something was going to happen that he had longed for since trying to compose his first piece of music as a young man. Friedrich Lang would be a name remembered for long after he departed this world. The barber moved on to trimming Lang's sideburns and tidying up the long ends of his graying mane. The man was a craftsman in his own domain, painstakingly trimming and checking each cut. He remained silent, reading Lang's mood, as the maestro slipped into his own thoughts. "Tomorrow, when this work is unveiled to the world, my life will change," he thought. Whether he transcribed the notes on paper or not, this music was his, and he alone would give it birth. He saw the effect it had on his own orchestra, and even the bumbling NAC minions who came to watch the rehearsals. When the 2,000 men and women who filled Southam Hall tomorrow evening heard this music, along with the usual horde of music critics, he would become known as the composer of Voyages of Destiny and achieve musical reverence. He cared not that the real composer wouldn't share any of the glory. Without Friedrich Lang, this work would have remained unknown. It was his arrangements and his persistence that brought it to the world. He had known from the first time he played it with Adeena Stewart in his private chambers that this was no ordinary composition. It had the rare gift of changing those who experienced it. As the barber finished up and turned him around to see himself in the mirror, he looked at his reflection and saw a composer who was 24 hours away from changing the world.